Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we're witnessing one of the greatest compute booms in history. AI and AI models are doing things today that 5 years ago we would have thought were impossible. And it's all being powered by massive racks of GPUs and other accelerators. It's undeniable that AI has completely changed how we work and how we live our lives. But today I want to talk about a different technology, one that has the potential to be just as disruptive and potentially even more powerful, and that's quantum. But the thing about quantum is it's still pretty early, and there's still a lot of questions that people have today. Questions like, is quantum computing going to completely replace classical computing? Is quantum sensing going to completely replace GPS? When will these two technologies really become mainstream, and how are these two companies addressing that opportunity in front of them today? So these are some of the questions that I'm hoping to discuss and hope we get answered today in my discussion. I'm Will Chu, I'm your moderator, and I'm joined on stage with two amazing panelists. We have Ben from Atom Computing and Mike from Q-CTRL. Thank you guys for joining me. So maybe to kick things off, Ben, let's say you're at a barbecue and you're trying to explain what quantum computing is to an average person without using some of the technical speak or the technical jargon. Is quantum computing just a faster way of doing things, or is it fundamentally a different way of compute?
Yeah, well, thank you first for inviting me and letting me speak here today. This has been an amazing event. Quantum computing is different. There's no question. It's not just a faster form of compute. It's not just a more parallelizable form of compute. It can actually tackle problems that are fundamentally different that can't be done on classical computers and normal computers. So when I talk to people about what I do, I talk to them about trapping atoms and manipulating quantum states and so on and so forth. But what I say is the end goal is really giving a compute platform that allows you to compute things that you couldn't do otherwise, whether it's the structure of proteins, whether it's the tiny particles inside a material and their properties. It's all about how do you actually understand these systems that are fundamentally not capable of being described classically.
Got it. And Mike, I'll be honest, when I think about quantum, I think of quantum computing. And don't get me wrong, I know your company also works with quantum computing, but you guys do something a little bit different as well. You guys do something called quantum sensing. And from my understanding, which is a very basic understanding, but quantum sensing is a way to look at the world differently or better. Can you explain to the audience maybe how quantum sensing changes or improves how you do things like GPS or medical imaging?
Sure. The starting point is that when we say quantum, we actually mean many, many different things. Quantum computing that Ben just talked about is one vertical, and of course we do a lot of work there. But there are other verticals like quantum communications, using quantum physics to give information security. And the one that we'll talk about now is quantum sensing, using quantum things to detect signals in the ambient world. Now, we use sensors all the time. If you back up in your car and you hear the little ding that says you're getting too close to a tree or a concrete barrier, that's because there's a sensor helping you in that process. And sensors are everywhere. One kind of sensor we use is for navigation. We use devices that let us figure out where we are in the world, both based on signals from satellites that we receive, that's GPS, and by measuring how we're moving in, say, an airplane. That's called inertial navigation. These things have been around for a long time, and they both have shortcomings. The one I'll focus on for now is GPS. What we have seen is a huge uptick in attacks on GPS. We think of it as this ubiquitous resource that's always available. But only about 6 or 8 weeks ago, the port of Doha was closed because there were deliberate interference attacks on GPS. This is a huge issue in commercial shipping. It's a huge issue in commercial aviation, where more than 1,000 flights a day are subject to deliberate GPS denial. We figured out a way to use quantum sensors as a new set of eyes to see hidden features of the Earth. And just like you can navigate around the city by identifying landmarks, we can identify magnetic landmarks. The trick is that quantum gives us the ability to see very, very fine features that are otherwise hidden in the noise, that are otherwise overwhelmed by interference. And we can do this over very long periods because the quantum sensors are very stable. They don't change over time in the same way that a device in your mobile phone might. So these two different kinds of benefits allow us to actually navigate when there is no GPS, and we've shown that our quantum navigation system is real right now and is 100 times better in positioning than the best alternative to GPS, making it useful in all these different domains.
Got it. And so it sounds like quantum computing, quantum sensing, there's a lot of really useful use cases. I want to go back to last year. Jensen from NVIDIA kind of very publicly made a 180 pivot in his timeline of quantum. He initially said that it's many years away, and then a month or so later kind of retracted that statement, said we're actually at an inflection point today. So Mike, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, if you think about the path to making quantum mainstream, does it rely on quantum becoming the complete replacement for classical computing, or in your eyes is the future a bit more hybrid?
No, I think it only needs to overcome a challenge that we see the same in AI that we've talked about today, and that is the trustability or the trustworthiness of the outputs. Quantum computers, as Ben was suggesting, should be thought of like an accelerator, just the way GPUs are a special accelerator used in AI. The problem we see is that quantum computers are unstable, and the answers that they give are more often than not wrong, and that's because the hardware suffers from faults. Very different than the way GPUs themselves work. Overcoming that barrier is really the key to broad deployment. And so at Q-CTRL, we focus a lot on the software that stabilizes the hardware, so the hardware is more trustworthy to the end users. But the pathway that we see going forward is very much that quantum processors, QPUs, will sit alongside GPU and CPU in a hybrid architecture in data centers. And we're working on all the things required to make that possible.
Got it. And Ben, I'm happy to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think this changes the timeline for useful quantum? Or maybe put a different way, are we closer to a ChatGPT moment in quantum than many people think?
Well, I think it's going to be fundamentally different than a ChatGPT moment, because I think the uses of quantum computers, I think, are going to be more hidden from the average consumer, but they'll be used by big conglomerates and industries. I think building new materials, I think new pharmaceuticals, things like that, people will feel that effect, but they won't be the ones programming quantum computers. Now, the flip side of this, like you said, is it is an accelerator. It is going to go hand in hand with classical computers. And I think one of the things that's been so exciting working with Microsoft is really understanding the connection they see between classical computing and AI and quantum computing. So there's a real world, I would say, where all of a sudden you start actually using a quantum computer to actually pump out data for an AI to be trained on. And I think that's actually probably one of the first examples we'll see of quantum computers getting used.
Got it. And I think Mike mentioned that if you look at hardware right now, it's very noisy, and Q-CTRL software is meant to help control that. Do you see from a hardware perspective that continuing to be a noisy thing, or just
yeah. I mean, I think over the last 18 months, this is why I think Jensen changed his mind. Is there's been an incredible inflection point where across the industry, both at Atom Computing and others, we've actually started to be able to do quantum error correction. And that is just a fundamentally different state of being for quantum computers. You've finally gotten over the hump of saying, do I have all my operations successful? Can I actually go and use logical qubits? And the cool thing about logical qubits is they will exponentially suppress errors. Like, if you think about all these amazing papers, all these amazing examples that Google has brought out, it's all about how they can actually just increase the size of their quantum computer and the errors go down. And that is the promise of error correction, and is why I think all of a sudden people are excited about quantum computing again.
Makes sense. And Mike, I think recently your Ironstone Opal won a pretty good award from Time as Best Inventions of 2025. So congratulations, that's an amazing achievement.
Thank you.
I'm curious your thoughts as quantum computing kind of continues to scale and continues to mature. Is quantum sensing kind of the quiet winner right now of quantum? Or actually, maybe I might put it another way. Is that a proof point that, I guess, quantum ROI is actually here today and actually happening right now? And then are we at a watershed moment where quantum, whether it's quantum sensing or quantum computing, but a watershed moment where it's on the horizon and we see something coming much faster?
Well, look, there are a couple different ways I want to answer this question, and for the fun of the audience, I may differ a little bit with Ben just on something. Quantum error correction, which you just heard about, it's like quantum computer science 101, one of the most important things that you can do to know that building big quantum computers is possible. That's absolutely true. It still basically makes everything worse now, right? The science behind it is being validated over and over again. You have these beautiful results from Google that Ben referred to a moment ago. But what they had to do in that experiment was they took all of the physical devices, the equivalent of transistors, all of them, and turned them into just one effective unit. That's very painful. It consumes a lot of resources. And so the timelines to really realizing big machines is still not tomorrow, right? There's still work to do. And there are things that are happening right now that are accelerating that. Our software makes quantum error correction more efficient. Ben is pushing really hard on the hardware with his partnership with Microsoft, et cetera. All of this is accelerating. But it's still not tomorrow. I think we can agree on that. And what kind of happened in the background is that something that did not have the same level of investor zeitgeist, which was sensing, more industrially focused defense and aerospace, well, we were able to actually show that it could beat the best alternative, not by 1% or 10%, but by 100 times in a real-world application on an airplane. What I think this does is it changes the overall narrative in quantum technology, where the naysayers inappropriately were saying, oh, it's always 5 years away, it's always 5 years away. That's clearly just not true. The progress on quantum compute is extremely profound and accelerating, and you have a real-world example of a fully commercialized, deployed quantum system. We work, and we just had an announcement recently that we have a big partnership with Airbus, bringing this kind of navigation technology to all commercial aviation, commercial airliners. This is today. And the combination of the sensing today and then the quantum computing over the next several years is a very exciting prospect across the field.
Got it. And then Ben, today when we look at quantum computing and how people are addressing it, there's many different ways that people are looking at this, many different modalities. You have the trapped ion, you have superconducting, you have photonics. Can you explain to the audience here why your specific approach, neutral atoms, why you believe neutral atoms is the right way to go?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to something Michael just said, which is that you need a lot of qubits. And amazingly enough, we are so far the only technology that keeps scaling. We built a system with 100 qubits for our first one, 1200s for our second generation. We're building our 10,000 qubit system right now. In other examples, throughout the US and academia, people have already gotten to many thousands of atoms. I think a lot of other technologies have a lot of great aspects to them, but at the end of the day, what you need is a system that scales, and if you don't have that, it doesn't matter if you can create, one perfect qubit.
Got it. And maybe last few questions for you guys. One is, when you guys look at quantum landscape today and the challenges you face, are the challenges more, and maybe I'll start with you, Mike, is the challenge more on the talent that's available? Is it a physics problem? Or is it just an access to capital? What do you guys see as the biggest challenge?
Look, this is really the deepest of deep technology. So there are huge challenges in getting investors to understand and embrace the extraordinary upside with the technical risk. I would say actually the biggest challenge we face is, maybe to surprise the audience, internal to our field. It's theorists who try to argue why by pen and paper proof the benefits we've seen are not big enough, or the systems will never be scalable enough, which is what some people argue. And what those kind of internal naysayers sometimes miss is that nobody cares what you can prove with pen and paper. What matters is what a customer experiences. And we're really on the verge with the engagements we've had, and I'm sure Ben and others have had, on the verge of delivering true commercial advantage in quantum computing. We've done it in sensing already. And I think getting the narrative across that this is not just a science experiment that we'll see what happens one day, but rather this is really delivering value or about to deliver value for very high economic value problems, that's a challenge we have to overcome.
Makes sense. Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I do agree with all the 3 points you made, though, as well. I mean, I think there's access to capital. There's fundamentally a talent shortage. We doubled the size of our company recently, and it was a struggle to get there. Certainly, it was easier to hire optical engineers, mechanical engineers, all these folks who have a broad set of expertise that's not quantum. And I would say those are the folks who are actually going to be building a lot of the quantum computers in some sense. But you still need the physicists to do the design work, to do the proof of principle, and there's just not a lot of them out there.
What do you think changes that? I mean, so I think it's funny because a few years ago, if you asked, for hardware engineers that are doing semiconductors, there weren't that many. But now with NVIDIA and all the AI, you see everyone wanting to become a hardware engineer again. What do you see changing, I guess, for quantum, where people, start crowding in and saying, this is where we want to be?
I mean, I think it's commercial wins are going to change that. I think that's the biggest thing that we can deliver that people will start seeing and start realizing that they want to come and work at Atom, come and work at all these other quantum computing companies. And so I think bigger and bigger commercial wins as we go is the right way to go and change that.
Got it. Mike?
No, I broadly agree. I think you've already seen a shift in the landscape that maybe 7 or 8 years ago when Ben and I were both starting our companies, there was a divide. Not everybody looked seriously at the industry opportunities. And now, basically, industry is dramatically favored, I would say, to just the standard postdoctoral academic route. Yeah. That's a great thing, but it will take time to fill that gap. The thing that we have focused on a lot is the non-quantum expertise, bringing in people who are experts in navigation systems or electrical engineering and upskilling them enough to be conversant in quantum. We think mainly the shortage that we have faced has been people from other sectors who are excited about applying their skills in quantum and capable of doing it at a conversant level as opposed to going to an AI inference company or something else. So we want them to understand enough that they see the true excitement that people like us share.
Got it. Well, Ben, Mike, thank you guys so much. I think we're out of time. This is an amazing discussion. It was a huge honor and pleasure to share the stage with you guys. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.